So recently, Brittany Pettibone and Lauren Southern put out a video where they talked a little bit about the idea of trading up in relationships, specifically women kind of wasting their youth. Jumping from one guy to another, thinking that they can get something better until they suddenly find that they have lost a lot of their sexual market value due to aging or other factors and can no longer get a guy as good as what they had had in, say, their early 20s. And in this video, they talk about a variety of relationship advice, most of which comes from older people with successful relationships that they talk to, and some things just supported by data, and some ideas that just come out of sort of tradition and the way that we used to do things, pre-birth control, pre-sexual revolution, and pre our selection in society. So I really appreciate that they were willing to put this out there and tackle that topic. Both of them are single, or at any rate unmarried, which a lot of commenters have pointed out. But it's an important topic, and they were humble enough to put forth not just their own personal advice, but sort of the wisdom of the ages. And I think it's a valuable video for women to watch, even if it might seem a little obvious to a lot of men. It's something that I think women actually do need to hear. So, to that end, I'm throwing my voice in the ring on this topic as well, mostly to affirm what was said in that video and then to add a little bit of color beyond that. So, one big topic that Lauren and Brittany covered in the video is this phenomenon that happens where women basically take too long to settle down and then find that they're declining in value, and it just kind of catches them by surprise. This happens because in general women are discouraged from settling down young. There are a whole lot of influences in society trying to glamorize dating life when you're older, like Sex and the City is a perfect example of this. It even starts with women in their 30s, and even though they address issues like losing the man of your dreams to a woman in her 20s, in the end it works out for everyone, and a lot of the really devastating consequences that accrue in real life aren't shown in the show. So, you know, you can think what you want of people taking their life advice from a television show, but unfortunately, that's sort of the world that we live in. People are raised by television. We don't really have a lot of intergenerational knowledge transfer going on to kind of guide people along the right path in life. And we're also sort of at the same time in this phase of like throw out all of tradition and replace it with radically new ideas due to advances in technology. And to some extent, that has to happen. That is how we move forward. But it often goes too far, and in this case I think it's pretty clear based on the rates of mental illness and the reports of how happy people are, especially in relationships, especially with respect to like having or not having children. We've definitely veered off in the wrong direction, at least a little bit here. And I think it's kind of funny because if you look empirically, it's actually not a big mystery or a big shock that women drop off this cliff in terms of their sexual market value. I mean, for one thing, there is a very hard cliff at menopause. So when women are no longer fertile, there's a whole slew of changes that happen. And this isn't even a question of just like some men want children. Actually, most men want children. That's another thing that's kind of a myth. But let's pretend, there are, a decent number of men who don't want children. So it's not even about the fertility issue. Because you've lost your fertility, nature's smart about this. Nature is trying to make more copies of you. And when you are no longer capable of making more copies of you, all of the stuff that made people want to do the thing that makes more people with you kind of go away. So for one thing, we know that there, but menopause happens sort of late, and I can understand why women might think, I can hang on, pretty long before I get to that point. But the reality is that the drop off is not as sharp. It's a sharp drop off there, but it's also quite a nice steady slide downward from about 28, 29 until you hit menopause. And this isn't actually just a thing for women or for men. Talk to any person who has hit 30 about what's different about their body. The decline has definitely started by 30, regardless of who you are, regardless of how fit you are. A lot of people do get in the best shape of their life in their 30s, but everyone notices that your body doesn't heal as fast. You don't bounce back from illnesses as quickly. Your energy levels are different, your dietary needs are different. Maintaining weight, maintaining muscle, all these things, they're different. So that's just kind of an empirical fact that anyone can check up. But the most compelling statistic that I would really encourage young women to look at is what people put into their search criteria on OkCupid. And by people, I mean men, and by men, I mean men of any age. Men of any age require under 30. And I am really not joking about this. There is a minority of men who are maybe interested in dating quote unquote older women. But for one thing, that is going to be pretty much a hard stop at 40, regardless of the man's age, whether he's 50, 60, whatever. Or if he's a younger guy, 30s guy who wants to date an older woman. He doesn't mean 20 years older. He means 5 years older, 6 years older, something like that. But the vast majority of men are putting, if your two-digit age doesn't start with a two, it's not happening. It just isn't. And these aren't bad guys. These aren't superficial guys. They're humans. We're animals that are meant to reproduce, whether we actually choose to do that or not. That's what our biological drives are kind of wired around. So that's what you get out there in the marketplace. And if you don't make your decisions in your 20s and get sort of settled in there with the right guy, you're really going to run out of options once you hit 30. Never mind questions about, what do you need for your happiness in terms of having children, how much easier it is to have children when you're younger. That's another thing I highly recommend. There aren't a whole lot of people, unfortunately, who can objectively speak about this, because most people, start having children and then, kind of go all in one go. I have spoken to women who had teen pregnancies and then later pregnancies in their mid 30s, and they can testify to you how much easier it is on your body when you're young. Pregnancy is no big deal. You start doing it in your 30s or even your late 20s, and it's a very different story. All the energy that you're using out there, burning up, partying, hanging out on the dance floor, whatever, that up all night energy is supposed to be keeping you up to feed a baby, to take care of a child. And you use all that on something else. Well, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to that, which is either not having children or having children when it's much more difficult on you, which means it's much more difficult on your husband, which means it's much more difficult on your relationship, which means it's much more difficult to get your body back afterward, and all kinds of things that, like it or not, both women and men care about. Which actually brings me into another topic that I wanted to bring up. On the one hand, you need to try and resist hypergamy. Hypergamy is this desire that women have, very strong desire to marry up, essentially, or to trade up, right? So you need to, make your decision with the guy and stick with it. But also, when you're making that initial decision with the guy, it is really tempting to just get sort of the highest status guy that you can get, sometimes on superficial criteria. And it's very important not to do that. Lauren talks well about the reasons why you shouldn't focus just on the superficial, and you need to make these good long-term decisions. One thing she doesn't talk about, probably because she's still like 22 and doesn't know, but one of the things you need to think about is the way that your sexual market value as a woman, it's basically looks. I'm sorry to tell you. I mean, to some extent, there's temperament, and men do care about intelligence. A lot of these things are exaggerated, but largely it's looks. And your looks are going to decline, and they're going to decline sooner than you think, and in maybe a different way than you think. Women age typically very gradually, but they start very early. So males will kind of look the same until they're maybe in their late 30s or 40, hit 40, and then all of a sudden they look like their dad. as opposed to women who will just like gradually every year, a couple more wrinkles, a little saggier, a little less elasticity, like, hair gets a little like kinkier or whatever, like different things happen. And before you go thinking that you can avoid all of these aging items that I've mentioned through surgery or cosmetics or different technology that we have now, you should know that women in their 30s also smell different than women in their 20s, and there ain't nothing you can do about that. And men notice it. So you can fake it, but only so far. And while men's looks are also important to their sexual market value, the biggest thing is the resources that they have. Wealth obviously is a big indicator of status, and general, like other things that are kind of related to stability and being a good provider. And those things will all tend to increase as you get older in the vast majority of cases, right? The older you are, the more wealth that you have. Everyone young starts out poor. So a 20-year-old guy, even if he's pretty attractive, doesn't have amazing sexual market value when it comes to being a good partner for marriage, right? A good candidate for marriage. On the other hand, a nice like 50-year-old silver fox has extremely high sexual market value, and any woman of any age, all the way down to like 18 and a half, is going to be excited to consider this guy as a partner. Meanwhile, you, like I said, after you hit 30, your options pretty much dry up. So if you may get the highest status guy that you can when you're in your prime, when you're at your peak sexual market value, you have to realize that you are only going to decline from there and he is only going to increase. And frankly, it is not very comfortable for people to date too far outside of their value. Your partner should match your value within a reasonable sort of range. If you think about this sort of 1 to 10 attractiveness scale, right? People always say like eights date eights. An eight dating a five tends to not really work out. Both parties end up feeling uncomfortable with that. But in particular, the five feels like that. And the reality for women is that in the end, you're going to be the five. You're not even going to be a five. Honestly, you're going to be like a two. Like every woman is going to end up at two. And, some men will never end up at two. A lot of them will, but some will never get there if they're lucky and they age well. So if you start out, let's say you follow this rule of like, okay, I'm an eight, so I'm going to marry an eight. Well, 10 years from now, you're a seven and he's a nine, and then a few more years go on and now you're a six and he's like still a nine, or maybe even like a nine and a quarter. And eventually this is starting to make you a little hysterical because you know that you aren't in a great position to try and hang on to this guy. And all loyalty and whatever aside, the reality is that wears on people psychologically, even when you have a strong wall foundation to kind of resist these things. So what I would highly recommend, if you can manage it, is just keep in mind the long-term sort of nature. And if you're an eight, maybe consider dating a guy who's a six or a seven. And as he goes up and you go down, you're going to kind of meet in the middle and you won't end up too far apart, when you're in going through the majority of your life together, especially after you have kids. And by the way, this progression that sexual market value has, where it goes down for women and goes up for men, and at some point you kind of are trying to cross in the middle, is another really good reason to get married young and pick your partner early. If you wait until you're already in decline, then your partner never got the benefit of experiencing you when you were in your prime. And that's kind of part of the deal. It's not like men in general just throw women away when they get old, right? But part of the reason why they don't do that is, number one, they made the investment of children with those women, and number two, they got to experience the woman when she was a nine, when she was at her peak, and he has strong memories of that. And the chemicals that cause long-term bonding, oxytocin and all that, were triggered during that time when you were in your prime. And that's important to people. That matters, and it should matter. I mean, it's a depressing fact of life that we're all just going to decline until one day that we die. And if you can look back and say, well, I remember her when, or I remember him when, they were just at their peak and everything was beautiful and amazing, then you're going to have a much harder time as you deal with liver spots and, everything else that goes on with aging. So maybe uh, not advice a lot of women are super keen to take. But I think it's good. I think it's good advice. I mean, I can say that I did things that way, and I am very, very glad that I did. And, obviously I have a lot of life left ahead of me, but I'm pretty close to 15 years into my relationship. And, that's, I think I have quite a bit of evidence to support, the way that I did things, at least anecdotally, in my case. So, right. So there was one piece of, I'd say, fairly conventional wisdom that Brittany brought up in the video that I wanted to push back on. She mentioned the advice, marry your best friend, which is definitely something that I've also heard. I have to say, I think that is total crap. That doesn't make any sense. I've had many best friends, many of whom have been male, and the one thing they have in common is I would not want to date a single one of them. I think that idea is based around maybe a flawed idea of friendship. In general, when I've seen the people who say that that's what they did or that's what they recommend, they're the kind of person who has like 200 close friends and sort of doesn't really know what friend means. So they mean like marry someone that you like as a person or something like that, which to me is like, well, obviously. I would say, in my case, I could tell like pretty early on with, the man I'm now married to. I don't know that we would even be like particularly good friends. I mean, we would probably be okay friends, but like it's just different. The romantic type of relationship and the friend type of relationship are so different. I don't think that this is really viable. And I've also seen quite a lot of circumstances in my life now where a couple has started out as friends, or they've started out with friends from the girl's perspective, but the guy was always kind of sort of interested, and then eventually the girl gets interested and they get married. And I gotta say, like, they all the ones that I've seen do that, they all end up divorced. And the reason they end up divorced, I mean, other than the reasons why most people end up divorced, the system makes it awfully easy, not just easy, but probably like appealing and advantageous for the woman. It will end up feeling like a compromise. It'll end up feeling like you settled. Um, and I have to say, like, I think the couples where they give this advice and they've made it work, I don't think they started out as friends and then married their best friends. I think they became each other's best friends as they went along, and they've kind of reversed the order, in looking back on their lives. So my advice would be to not do that. Definitely make sure that you can tell the difference between romantic interest and, interest in just being someone's friend, because it's got to carry you through your whole life together. And friendship is not, I honestly don't think it's the right foundation for that. Shared values, yes, definitely shared values are important, um, indispensable, but that's not the same thing as friendship. So take that for what you will. I can't believe that I am dispensing female centric advice on this channel, but hey, we're half a society and probably more than half of society's problems. So if any women out there are listening, I hope you take this to heart. Thank you.